Jeff, I love that sign that Rosie's holding up. It says, "Be kind." I think that's such an important message for us all.
Good one.
We're very proud of her. If you can believe it, she's very kind.
Claire,
You broke up there, Jeff. I couldn't hear what you said.
I said she's, if you can believe it, she started her own kindness club at school.
Oh, that's cool. That is so cool. Kids are so great.
They are.
stop my video so I can eat. I'm finishing eating.
Have a good dinner. Absolutely.
Otherwise, you're going to have to share it, Holly.
Yep.
It's a hot dog. It's pretty pathetic.
Oh, dear. Want me to send over a casserole for you?
Yeah. I was raised by wolves, so
I'm sure they were very nice wolves, Holly.
not really. But I survived.
My folks used to say, "What, you think you were raised in a barn?"
Yeah. Yep, I know. Who's running the meeting?
I think this is just kind of an open community discussion. There are a couple topics that I think, a lot of people have been talking about on the listserv and, amongst neighbors, but pretty much, there's just, a discussion of all the kinds of things that people are thinking about and some good ideas, I hope, for, productive stuff that we could do together. And I think
I got the point of it. I'm not who's running it. Is someone on the council running it?
There'll be probably just a second. I'm sure we have Todd and Jeff from the council here, but I'm sure we'll have everybody in once we, because I anticipate everyone coming. Then I think we can just get started and facilitate it that way. That was my understanding. So Todd or Jeff can speak to that.
No, I think that's fine. Jeff, happy to have you be our facilitator, so by all means.
Take it away, Jeff.
Sounds great. Are we ready to kick off?
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? So there's no set agenda on this, I take it? We're just
No.
going to stay on? And is there a time frame for this? Just going to go on for how long it goes on?
I think 7:30 to 9 is the general time frame.
I think we.
Okay.
We may be done before then.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to.
Okay, let me do one thing
I think can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, you sound good.
Great, sorry, I saw that. So I think, Mark, they probably answered your question. I think we usually have about an hour, but, plus or minus, however it works. And so I'd be happy to jump in. First of all, just greetings. I think it's the first time we're seeing each other after the new year. So we certainly hope that everyone has been well and safe. These are clearly still very difficult times. And so we really just hope everyone had some time to recharge the batteries. And, we're heading into a new year. Couple things that are just on my mind is, my day job, I've spoken to a lot of folks. I know that the last couple weeks has been very challenging, especially for us here on the Beltway, where we saw, not long ago, a mob and an attack downtown. And I know that day, I happened not to have been working downtown, but my office was very close by, and there were colleagues who were right there, and it was a very scary thing. So, again, we hope that everyone is doing well, and that was obviously something that was difficult. We also, I'm sure others will bring it up, we've had some losses in our community that have been very difficult for us during these times. Losses just really affect us a great deal, and so certainly Frank Carell, someone who's a former council member, a very dear friend of mine and neighbor, just putting that out. And again, my heart is with him and his family, and I know Frank is probably with us today on this call. And finally, I know there's going to be a lot of great discussion today. I mean, I see Todd, I see Arthur. There's a lot of hard work. We have members of our committees here around ordinances. We have, I think, a really important proposal for safety, and I'm sure there's a lot of things. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over and listen and learn. And before we hit off with all the residents, maybe I just wanted to ask if other members of the council wanted to add any other thoughts. Thanks.
Could I ask, and most people are up here with either pictures or names, but we have an iPad and an iPad Air 2. Hi, whoever you are, could you tell us who you are?
They're muted.
iPad Air 2 is Lynn Welly.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi, Marty. Good to see you.
You too, my old friend.
Hi, and iPad is Tiffany Cessna.
Hey, Tiffany.
Hey, Marty.
All right, well, so I really have nothing to add to what Jeff mentioned, other than we're here to listen. So listen we shall. Thanks.
Well, I'm also listening. There is a proposed tree ordinance, the third or fourth draft up there that people could have downloaded and looked at today. I'm anxious to see if anyone has any discussion of that. I've worked with Laura Beal on this, and we tried to put together something that was effective and not too onerous. And if anyone has any views or opinions, one way or the other, we'd like to hear.
There was a lot of discussion about the tree ordinance on the listserv, I think that people were mostly concerned, at least from my take on it, was that people were mostly concerned about the ordinance, not that it applied to developers, which people seem to agree with, but that it would apply to private homeowners. If you had a tree in your backyard that you needed to take down because it was, about to fall in your garage or something. And the question was that the final ordinance talks about having tree removal fees if, or the draft that you circulated, and thank you, Arthur. I also talked to Lauren about it too, because of course she had a lot of deforestation that really affected her property from the developer here on Thornap. But the concern was, how did this come out? There's something about sediment permits now require tree permits too.
Yeah,
Can you explain that a little more?
What we try to do, what Lauren had pointed out, is that Martin's Addition had exempted itself from the county tree ordinance about five years ago. And the reason is that the county required this fee if you either had to plant a tree or pay a fee. And you had to plant 3 trees. And the reason behind that was that 2 out of 3 new trees die. So they say in order to get 1 survivor, you plant 3. And they then charge $250, or you could get out of it. You could, a person could say, no, we can't do that. We don't have the room. We don't like it. We hate trees. And so you could pay $250 a piece or $750. Now, it turned out since we exempted ourselves from that, we didn't get any of the benefits. And any developer, so if you require a sediment control permit, which generally means you're moving a fair bit of dirt around, then that is the triggering mechanism. So for this draft, I simply copied the county ordinance. I copied their language, simplified it a bit. I said we don't need 3 trees, just plant 1. And if you can't do that, I had the same fees that the county had. But then I added in one kicker to that. That is, if you're taking down a sizable tree, you should pay the same amount, or either replace it or pay the same amount as if you weren't taking down any trees. So it is essentially an attempt to get back into the same regime as the county, with the added bonus, I think, that if you take down a sizable tree and the size is delineated, either have to replace it or pay the same fee as you would to plant a new one. So that's it. So it does not apply, if you don't apply for a sediment control permit, it does not apply. And this usually is a major construction project.
Right. You know, and Arthur, I remember, I think you're referring to just taking down a big healthy tree.
Yes.
Yeah. So, the buzz that I've seen is that, and, what has happened historically in the village is that, tree committees or tree ordinances are usually the end product of the scalping of a property. So, I served on the most recent tree committee about 5 to 8 years ago, when the two properties on Cummings Lane were scalped, and there were maybe 80 trees that were taken down on those adjoining properties that caused a huge stormwater runoff problem. So, so my assumption is that we're talking about healthy trees being taken down, and I remember that the focus should probably be on the developers, because Josh did this very and Josh can speak to this. Josh did this very extensive analysis of people who had put on additions or did some new construction in their yard. There wasn't a whole lot of room to put. People don't have a whole lot of property anyway in the Village of Martin's Additions, and it didn't seem that people, residents, were taking down trees, healthy trees, sort of willy-nilly. That most residents, if they wanted to put on an addition, were very happy to make accommodations with their building plans. So, I, for one, as a former tree supervisor, would really advocate for requiring developers to mitigate any damage to the landscape, and do that by being required to pay some sort of fee or planting a tree in a healthy tree's place.
Right. I should say that Paula was, as you noted, a member of the tree committee from about 6 years ago, 5 years ago. We sent a report, and we did make recommendations along these lines. The one that we're submitting today, or this next week, is a kind of a slightly watered down version of what the tree committee had proposed 6 years ago. And I want to thank Paula for her contributions there. As somebody who barely knew the difference between an oak and a maple, she was invaluable.
John McDonald, Summit Avenue. Excuse me. It's not inexpensive to take a tree down. My neighbor and I had a diseased American elm several years ago. It cost $6,000 to take down. So
Right.
I think, in one respect, it's not a decision that people undertake lightly. Second, what is meant by sediment control in terms of quantity? Is it cubic foot, a cubic yard?
I'm going to ask Niles if he can fill me in here, if you know. But
Right.
it is required when there is a major construction project, and this is done with the county. The village does not regulate the sediment control, but that's usually a trigger for a number of other actions of licensing and permitting. Niles, can you fill that in?
Certainly. Okay, so the sediment control permit, I'm going to pull something up in just a second to read from it. But the sediment control is basically what the county does when it looks at the displacing of topsoil, the additions of square feet and things like that. So there are plenty of different requirements that the county looks at that says this requires a sediment control building. So like if you're like, I'm going to use this as an example, if you're adding a deck to your house, right, that wouldn't require a sediment control permit because you're not actually affecting the sediment in a really significant way. So a little bit here and there. So just give me 1 second here. I just want to read the... because what the so what the county says is that engineered sediment control permit is required for certain constructions activities. An engineered sediment control application must be used for any project subject to sediment control requirements that include stormwater management. So that's the other part. If it's dealing with how water could affect your property, that's the other big thing. They have various different requirements. They can be sometimes substantial, basis. So, for example, a sediment control permit is required for a land distribution activity of 5,000 square feet or more of land, resulting in 100 cubic yards or more of earth movement. Okay, so from the 10,000 foot 10,000 foot view, that's like the basic requirement. But it can be in some cases more than that if they're doing things that specifically affect sediment, right? So if you are digging, less than 5,000 square feet, but if you're digging deep and things like that, that would also move
Niles,
earth.
how many cubic feet was that?
So it's 100 cubic yards.
100 cubic yards.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank
So
you. Well, that's not digging up your back garden. This is substantial.
right.
Well, just to wrap this up, I would hope that if a licensed arborist recommended to be taken down, that a resident not run afoul of paying something to the village if he, as a private landowner.
So if you're taking down a tree in your backyard and you don't require a county permit, a county building permit, and sediment control, you can do what you want. It doesn't enter in. It doesn't trigger anything.
Scroll over, you see my name.
Thank you.
Right, but as you said, it's really expensive to take down a big, healthy tree, so there aren't a whole lot of people who do it. And in the time period that we on the tree committee studied that was not the issue in the Village of Martin's Additions. What was the issue were developers who had assured many residents that properties would not be scalped. Scalp the properties in order to put in big houses with dry wells. And those of us who live at the bottom of, in the basin of the bowls and in the Village of Martin's Additions, I can tell you that we, with the construction that has taken place around our houses, that we have ended up actually spending thousands of dollars to take down trees that have been killed, stormwater issues and properties.
Miles,
I'm going to do it.
You're going to have to mute somebody.
Yeah, I did.
Barry's muting. Someone needs, So anyway, it seems to be more of a problem with properties that are developed that have houses with a much larger footprint put on them, and then the builders are required to put in dry wells. And for those of us in lower elevations in the Village of Martin's Additions, we are the ones who have, even though there are stormwater mitigation requirements and sediment, Peter, I forget what they're called, but some sediment retention, all of us know that life is not perfect and that these measures are not perfect. And there are several of us who have spent thousands of dollars to compensate for the erosion on our properties, that have not only included, landscaping terrain, but several of us have had to take down some very large old trees that just could not survive the disruption that construction caused.
I would like to add that we did have on our tree committee a developer who advised us that what developers love to do is simply level everything so that the backhoes can go up and down and not worry about knocking anything over. And so this kind of informed our view. I saw Mark Schaefer, you had a question, you had your hand up.
I did have a question, Arthur. Does anybody know whether or not removal of a large tree has, water course impact? Because it seems to me that one of the problems that Paula was referring to, and that we've all experienced, I've experienced it, and now the north side of Shepherd is experiencing changes in the water course that are flooding yards. And I wondered if trees were related to that and taking them out.
Yeah, that is, large trees have an enormous water retention capability. And the problem is that the county, Martin's Addition does not regulate water flow, the county does. And you are supposed to maintain all water on your property up to a certain size of storm and flow. If that does not happen, then it becomes a neighbor-to-neighbor issue. We've run into this a number of times. People have come to the village, and we say, we hate to say it, but it's what the law says. This is a neighbor-to-neighbor issue. They were supposed to have done that. If it's not happening, then you have to work with the neighbor and perhaps go back to the county and say that the water flow is not going according to the water flow plan. And we've had this on a number of occasions where sometimes the original owner moves out and a new owner moves in who become very cooperative. They want to get along with their neighbors and they put in new drainage capabilities. But it is a serious problem. And that's one of the reasons for wanting to have large trees, is that they do maintain a tremendous amount of water retention capabilities.
Hey, Arthur, it's Tiffany. I don't know if there's somebody else.
Tiffany, what was that in here?
I don't know if there was somebody else waiting. So
Was there anyone else with their hand up?
Not that I saw. Go ahead.
I'll wait for Tiffany. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Thanks,
Well, Tiffany was just saying that she thought she saw somebody.
Well, I read through the ordinance. Thank you for the proposed ordinance. I just think it's important for everybody, since we've talked about process, that you're talking about it tonight, but it hasn't been introduced yet in the council.
Right.
So for folks who are, time to comment and discuss, like, this is a good thing. It's showing that you guys are being responsive to what folks are asking for. I just had a couple of questions kind of in the drafting, and I know you said you copied and pasted, which, I'm a big fan of. Some of the language around the county analysis from 2015 on the tree canopy, and it talks about how we lost large trees, but we didn't lose coverage. And so trying to make sure that the goal, in Martin's Additions is kind of clear for going forward. And I don't know, I'm not a tree expert about retention and, the benefits, cooling, oxygen, et cetera, about, at some point, does this lead to a certain number of trees on certain lots versus it being a coverage thing?
Right. Thanks, Tiffany. That was an important point. When the tree committee, we were dealing with the tree analyst for the county, who had access to aerial photography over periods of time, and she could look at changes in coverage of canopy over many years. And she made this critical analysis that said even though we were losing trees, we weren't losing canopy in net, because older trees were getting bigger. And so rather than trying to control the taking out of every individual tree, what we decided to do was to look to the long-term health of the canopy and promote planting of new trees that in the future would become big trees. And so that was a kind of overall strategy that the tree committee took. And we looked at the experience of neighboring jurisdictions that required a license to take out any tree. You had to apply for a license, and it did not seem to be cost effective. It was burdensome, and instead we wanted to promote the planting of new canopy trees, large trees that would have all these positive effects, so that over time the total canopy would grow and not decline. Now, there's one other thing I want to point out. I'm quite proud of this. Following Todd Mann's description of the ethics ordinance, this is our first attempt to formally provide a explanation of why we're doing this ordinance. And we have reasons why, explanations, what's the background of it, what are alternatives, what are the arguments against. One of my colleagues said, don't put in arguments against, people can come up with their own arguments. And I thought, well, let's see how this works and come up with the arguments that people are likely to raise, and then try to kind of partially rebut them in advance. And so I sat down and I kind of said, well, what is it? Some people hate trees. I have a friend who says, I'm definitely afraid of trees that are going to fall on me. And in fact, sometimes they do. And so these are some of the things that one has to consider. Anyway, any more questions?
Arthur, just before you go, you mentioned, the path that you guys did take, which was incentivizing tree planting. And for this year, there were two other kind of things that I noticed that were recent. There was a huge increase in the participation in the tree program this year. Yeah. And that's exciting. I mean, we participated in it, and we have another tree that we're going to be planting we got from someone else. So in 1 year, the citizens are doing two. So I'm curious about what, I don't know if there's been analysis of, what were the trees that were planted? Were they canopy trees or a mixture of canopy and ornamental?
Right.
And also, maybe people had more time at home this year so they could pay attention to planting trees.
Well, Tiffany, we did one other thing. We've been disappointed by the number of private property owners who've decided to take advantage of the village's subsidized tree planting program. We had required a fee of $100. Now, to plant a 3-inch caliber tree cost roughly $600. You buy the tree, cart it down here, plant it. And so there was essentially a $500 subsidy. We know that in Section 5, they were getting dozens of applications year in and year out. We were getting 1 and 2. So I thought the one difference was there was a $100 fee. So I wanted to get rid of that, which the council did this year. And all of a sudden, the applications went up from 1 or 2. We had actually about 15 applications, but some of them, they just didn't have the space. When the arborists went out and looked, they said, no, we can't put one here. So I think we ended up planting 9. Was that right, Niles?
It was, hang on. It was 11.
11. Okay, the final count was 11. We had more applications from roughly 1 or 2 a year. So I think getting rid of the $100 fee was a big incentive. Plus, we've been trying to advertise it more, promote it more, tell people, there are some good canopy trees out there for the asking. Just provide the space for it, and we'll even check it. The arborist goes out, checks the space, tries to select the best place on the lot to put it, and so it's a deal.
Yeah. So how that, just if you guys think there might be a trend of that going forward, which is exciting, how does that fit into this? Because I know there's a mention of the program, in the past, it not being used, but for this year, the most recent data we have, it was really subscribed to, and maybe there's successes to be built on there for going forward. And then just kind of the last thing is the square feet requirements, etc. I think a lot of that you mentioned came from the county, and that's where I think we learned a lot. It was a lot of work during the accessory dwelling discussion about the uniqueness of BMA lots and what's possible and what's not. And so I just would like to encourage the council to, whether it's some arborist time or tree supervisor time, and Arthur, I'll volunteer your time,
Okay.
to go and maybe do some of that lot analysis again, because I think our accessory dwelling ordinance was very well informed by that additional research, and I'm wondering if this might also benefit from doing a little bit more lot analysis. Because again,
that there are some lots where there just isn't the room. This is what Josh had found in his analysis when he was on the tree committee, that given the size of the lot, and on new construction sometimes there was water retention facilities, required that where you could not plant a tree, that there just wasn't room.
Yeah.
The county doesn't get into any of that. It's a blanket requirement. And all a builder or developer or anyone has to say is, we can't do it, and then you pay the money, the fee.
So that maybe I'm echoing a little bit of what I heard Mr. McDonald say earlier. Just if that's the case, like Josh's research seemed to find, and you guys concluded years ago, that there are lots where this just doesn't work, with the water retention requirements, then making sure that we're not penalizing, homeowners for that.
Right. Yeah. It would be feasible to put in some built-in exemptions, but for the most part, I think we are not targeting current owners and residents, but mainly people who are doing development. Now, and one of the things about doing development is that you're flexible at that point, and so the ability to make choices about where you're going to place. Where you're going to site the structures and other facilities is more wide open than it is when you're just digging a hole in the backyard, taking a tree down in the backyard. So,
Arthur and Tiffany, I'm
Thanks,
just gonna jump in real quick and just say, first of all, this has been a really fabulous discussion, and I'm sure we're going to continue it. It looks like we're going to be heading towards whether it's an introduction or more discussion, and I know that this is a topic that many of us care about, but I do want to just be mindful of the time and cadence, and so I did want to just, so there was a comment in the chat which brings up, I think, some topics that probably resonate with a bunch of folks. It talks about community safety. We know that there's been a bunch of things, listserv and otherwise, around some break-ins and other stuff. And also, I think something which is very much on the minds of everybody, which is the mail-in voting, especially with COVID and where we are, the importance of making those decisions in the safety of our community. So rather than listen to me, maybe what I could do is just turn over folks, others here, in terms of what their thoughts are specific to safety. I see Mark, maybe I could call you out, but I know that you've had a lot of thought behind this proposal that's been put together, and maybe you wanted to take a moment about that, and then if there are others who want to talk about or the mail-in and the importance of that. So over to our residents, and Mark, maybe I'll pick on you. Okay.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank all of you for attending this meeting. These meetings are great. They remind me of why I was so happy to live in Martin's Addition many years ago. You all know that, or most of you probably know that in December I presented a resolution for creating a safety committee, and quite frankly, I didn't do an effective job, and probably had a cart before the horse problem, and that was very useful to learn that. What I learned is that we needed to have a better sense of how to conceptualize the safety committee and what it could effectively do and what it couldn't do. And we had to build community support. The only way safety committee is going to work is if it has community support, community participation. And the only way we can do that is have meetings like this where instead of telling you what some of us want to do, we listen to you about what you think the committee should do if we were to create it. And so I want to give you like 2-minute background, and then I just want to listen. I want guidance. After my presentation in December, a couple council members were very helpful in framing up helping me frame up how this could be better evaluated. And just to be clear, what we did is that we studied what other communities were doing. The current proposed scope of work is premised upon the safety committee for the village. And I also looked at Bowie, and I looked at Annapolis. I looked where I could find safety communities. And I think that from all of that, what we learned is that the best safety committee is not a group of people who are going to wear badges and tell people what to do, okay? It is an information clearinghouse where we find information about health safety and crime safety. We liaison with our fellow committees like the election committee and the walkability committee, and we meet with police departments and their public safety groups and the health department, and we learn and we find out what's going on. We match that up against what our members are saying is of concern to them, and we present. We do an analysis and we present for people to discuss, for the community to discuss, for the council to discuss, for the manager to think about, and we look for building a consensus on different things. Now, what those things are, we'll see. All right? But I can tell you that a number of things have come up. I think I've said a lot of this in December, but I'm going to say it again. On the listserv and in conversations with people in the community, we heard concerns about COVID and health. I listened to the governor's presentation tonight, and I'm glad to know that I'm finally going to be in stage 1C. And if I can find how to sign up and where to sign up, and they have the stuff, I may get a shot in a couple of weeks. That'd be great. My kids would be happy. But it's chaos. And so a safety committee for this type of a problem and for similar problems could do the research for you and share it and give you the resources to compose. And if there were recommended behaviors, we could share those with you, and then the community would decide what they want to do. We're not going to tell people what to do. So but the issues that came up with regards to COVID are the election. So that's an issue for, now it's for the election committee. If we were to get involved in it, there'd have to be some liaison and coordinate. If the safety committee was created and we got involved in that, there'd have to be a decision as to how those two committees would liaison with each other and who would have the primary role. And I don't care what that decision is, but the council would have to make that decision. Then there's also the issue of masks in the park. Now, I walk around Martin's Addition, and the Martin's Addition residents are so responsible with masks, all right? But I'm across the street from the park, and the soccer parents aren't. That's just it. When we first started the safety idea, we went to the county, and because the sign, there was one sign, and it was about the size of a piece of Xerox paper, and it was 1 foot off the ground. And the county gave us 4 more signs, which are now the size of 3 pieces of Xerox paper, bent over, hanging down, and only are at one entrance that I could see. Maybe I'm wrong. And so that could be looked at again, and we could liaison with the county again and maybe get a more effective presentation. Or we could ask our county residents to do something themselves, to put up their own signs in the area of the park. But we would see where the consensus is and how that should best be done. There's the second big area is crime and tolerance. And that's sort of what, as I mentioned in December, that's sort of what the tolerance issue is, what sort of lit me up on this whole safety committee thing. The idea that anybody passing through Martin's Addition would tear down a political sign or throw dog poop on somebody's sign or on their porch because of their expression of political views is appalling. Martin's Addition is a liberal in the classic English sense, tolerant community. But there's a few people that haven't gotten the message. And I even saw another couple of listserv references recently about repeating that concern. So whether they're still tearing down signs or not, I don't know. I just spent a month with my family in LA, quarantining, so I could just see them for the first time in 10 months. But if it's still a problem, it should be addressed. And how should it be addressed? Carrot and stick. We would decide what that is, but the carrot would be to say, come on, here's who we are, here's what we want, here's how our community works, here's mature work behavior, maybe some signs or something, or maybe some discussion or debate. We talk about what the carrot should look like, and then there would be a consensus, and then depending upon how the council would set up the safety committee, maybe we would act, or maybe the council would act. It would depend. And so, and then there's the whole issue of crime. Now, there's just been too many car break-ins. It's just an ongoing problem. And I don't see any police, or I don't see Martin's Addition doesn't have very much it can do. But I think that we could engage the police more in this if we gave them data. Police love data. I did a lot of criminal law earlier on in my career. They need data, documents, they need witnesses, they need photographs, they need times, place, and dates, they need somebody to talk to. The committee could sort of like encourage people to do that on a one-on-one basis, because an individual has to file the complaint, right? Or they could build data and share it with the police, and then try to get the police to tell us what they think we should do. It's not just assuming that we can actually affect an arrest. I mean, I've done that a few times in my career when I switched sides and represented corporations who were getting stolen from. But the police could tell us how we can govern ourselves in a socially responsible way. Governance is not the right word. How we can relate to each other in a socially responsive way, to look out for each other, to keep an eye on things, to report what we see to each other, to, you know, like a sort of like a neighborhood watch without little hats and uniforms, okay? And without any sense of ego. And we would just like help each other. And certainly there could be a lock your car campaign. My cars have been broken into. I haven't had any big desecrations since my daughter left for college and the boys stopped egging our house. But every time my car's been broken into, it was unlocked. It's my fault, okay? And people on the listserv said sometimes, oh, yeah, it was my fault. Why can't we just, in a soft way, encourage people to lock their cars and remind them that it's their responsibility if their car's broken into? It's a simple thing. So we could do soft things, encouraging better behavior amongst ourselves, watching each other's houses and cars, and just paying attention, you know, not staring in the windows or anything silly, but just paying attention, reporting things to each other when things happen, and collecting it someplace, and going to the police and say, okay, what do we do about these things, or what can you do about these things? All right. So it's basically, I mean, I think Paula had the right term. We would be sort of a clearinghouse resource, collecting information, giving you information, collecting information, giving the police information, and facilitating a greater atmosphere of safety. That's what we want. I mean, we want to feel safe. We want Martin's Addition to feel like it used to feel before this stuff happened. And so that's sort of the crux of the whole thing. So,
if I could chime in on that note, I think that we are a very caring and compassionate community, and that we need to really look out for each other on many levels, and that includes, helping neighbors who need groceries delivered because of the COVID, the health issues, but it also includes keeping an eye on each other's houses, and I think it also includes information. And one of the most useful things that I see a safety committee doing is getting the information collected and out there. I mean, Niles, I know that some people report to you, and I wish the safety committee would encourage everybody to report the incidents, because then we'd have a much better sense of just where we are. I mean, the police aren't the only ones who'd like some data, Mark. I think that the community would like to have maybe a report every month that says, here's what happened this month, so that people have a sense of just how serious this is, because it feels serious if it happens to you. But I need to, happen to my next door neighbor, with the dog poop on her sign. And that upset everybody. I mean, it's not just the individual targeted. It's all of us looking out for each other. And a safety committee provides a forum for people to discuss it. I think there are lots of good things we could do. More cameras on people's doors, you know, I mean, to get, you know, data reported. But it starts with us as a community making our own neighborhood, our own streets safer by reporting the stuff. And I'd like to see us report it to a safety committee. You know, I mean, to Niles, yes, but Niles, you've got a lot of work to do already. So a safety committee would be like the central place that people could report all kinds of incidents. And that I must say that the nasty messages that seem to be bigoted and politically motivated really, really just set my teeth on edge. I mean, that felt very threatening to me. That's not who we are, I hope. And, but that's the kind of thing that I think a lot of people didn't report. They were just upset by it, and their neighbors were upset by it. So a safety committee would really be important, I think, to be a central place where we can analyze and report this stuff. You know, some people don't want to report things to the police. They're busy, they don't want to do that. But they can at least report to the safety committee so we in the community know what's going on around us, and we can figure out, I mean, there are lots of things we can do to make the neighborhood safer ourselves, you know, in addition to what the police may need. So I see a safety committee as really kind of a central organizing forum for people to report this kind of stuff, and whether it's car ransackings or the sort of nasty hate messages that are pretty threatening in my view, and anything else that comes on. And I'm not saying that we should ever be vigilantes. And Mark, I like the fact that you talked about not wearing little hats and carrying whistles and stuff like that. I don't think that's our role. But I think we're a caring community, and I think we really need to value that and put that forward as part of our core identity as a community. And we can be very positive about, you know, what you can do to help. And it starts by sharing information. If something creepy happens to you, let the committee know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I had a thought, and then I'll give it over to Mr. Lawson. I was inspired by Lori and her group's presentation on Tuesday. All right, enough compliments, that's all you get. And so when we talked about putting those, whatever that Dutch word was, each corner and all that stuff, and sort of giving out the message to traffic along our borders that you're going to have to drive slower in our community. I think that the safety committee might think about, what's the word I want? Low power, friendly ways of conveying the same message to people that may be lawless. All right. It's soft power, but we're and I don't mean like the neighborhood watch sign with the guy with a little hat and, you know, all that stuff, although maybe someday it'll go that way, but I hope not. But if we could just convey the fact that we're mindful and we're together and we're out for each other and we watch cars, unfortunately probably not so much at 2 a.m, but maybe we could put some more of those ring things on, that it would have an effect. I know criminals. They don't want, except for the teenagers who are like stupid like all teenagers, and I was, they don't want any exposure. They don't want their faces seen. They don't want their car license plates seen. They don't want any of that stuff. They want a quick in and out kind of a thing. And I can prove it. You know, I put a ring on my doorbell when my wireless doorbell broke for like the 5th time because of rain, and I was sick of that. And also, I was going to be out of town. So the reality is 90% of the people I saw come up to my door were my neighbors who were bringing in my mail or checking on my house, my gardener, my postman, and every car that went by the street. But 2 guys walked up to my driveway, started walking towards my door, came on the ring thing, saw the ring thing, and left. So if we could have, and Ring provides a neighborhood community where you find news about all this stuff around the community, although I really don't want to know what's going on in Friendship Heights, but if we could do our own Martin's Additions version of this, which is like soft power, and the fact that people are aware that we're mindful, it'll have a modest deterrent effect. I mean, nothing does anything more than mitigate, but it could have a modest.
Mark, You guys, I think we're having a safety committee meeting here rather than proposing having a safety committee. And I think having a safety committee is a great idea, but I don't think we should keep talking about what the safety committee should do, because I think we all should talk. I love hearing it, but I think we need to have that committee rather than have it here. I think you all have great ideas. Okay,
Let's talk about some other ideas. Do we have some more ideas or thoughts?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, you remember the incident with it started out with this one lady who was complaining about somebody constantly throwing dog poop, I think at her porch or something. Did you actually watch? So first off, I emailed her and suggested to her that doing it on listserv would not bring it to the attention of the police, and if the police didn't know about it, they have no way of realizing they need to be around. So that she really should contact them. And she was afraid of offending her neighbors. In her email reply to me and said no. So then you sort of watched what happened on the listserv, and every time there was a comment about her that she made or others then responded to, she got it even worse. It was as if somebody watching the listserv was enjoying the fact that his repeated or her repeated actions was getting everybody jumping up and down. And I found that really interesting, that there was a correlation there. And now that she's not saying anything, it seems to have dropped off.
That's a bravery question, isn't it? I mean, you're either going to stand up to being abused or you're going to tolerate being abused. So,
Yeah.
and that's
But it's also the idea that maybe the safety committee is a less public way of identifying the situation, so that a person doing it doesn't get possibly the notoriety they want.
Yeah, and if you could get, even if people were able to remain semi-anonymous, and you could get the police to drive through more often because of this, and at the hours that this would occur, because nobody's yet told me what hours these things occur, then that might discourage things too. But you're right, the safety committee could take the brunt of the public discussion.
Mark, this is Tiffany Sisnett. I just want to ask you a couple of questions about, I read through the scope, and I think I have logistical questions about who would liaise with who, because I think after being a council member and working with the staff, it can get confusing if there are a bunch of different people that are belly buttoning with the county, with the elected officials. So I think that's something for, as you guys are discussing going forward, or the council decides to take this up, maybe just making sure that that's clear, so that Niles is, empowered and has the authority as the manager, and the council's dealing with the elected officials as they go. I also am wondering, I know that some of this information is reported, and that we do have our two, they're senior Montgomery County police officers who are here. They're not here as often, but maybe also getting, the most recent information from them. I'm not privy to it, about what has been reported, when is it being reported? Because I know, especially when they've given us the trend analysis, for Martin's Edition things, it's been very helpful, in the past when I was on the council, about whether it was speeding or break-ins or, and I think that's key. And I also just want to put out there for folks, as the listserv has discussed, but also there has come up in council meetings directly for the council members to hear, there are things that are within Martin's Edition's purview, and public safety is one of them. I think when we start to talk about things that are, whether it's land or subject matter that's outside of Martin's Edition's purview, resident to resident communication can be more freely done, more accurately done, more quickly done, versus the official municipal government body beginning to engage in something that's not within its authority. So I just, as you guys are talking about the scope and then, having to flesh out a little bit how logistics may or may not work, I say this to the council members, those are things I know that you're responsible for. Sending out a note to the listserv or making sure when my neighbors are out of town, I'm helping pick up boxes and mail. That's something that I can do, and I would rather me do, and I think most residents would rather do than, somehow the office get involved in that kind of stuff. So thank you very much for the work you've done.
Yeah, Mark, I would second what Tiffany just said. One of the functions I could see a committee doing is having a list of who do you call when something happens, and it usually, given as Tiffany says that the village has a limited scope of things that it does. Hope we do it well, but if there's a dead deer on your front yard, you don't call Niles. There is an animal control people at the county level who can handle that. Now, Niles and the office do have those lists, but if the committee provided these sorts of things and was a resource in that.
Arthur, it's in the directory that was just delivered to your house last week.
I haven't looked at the back page, the yellow pages yet. But there are all those kinds of functions of who do you call? And typically it's not the village office, but somebody else. It's usually somewhere in the county.
I think that the two comments are phenomenal. I hope you'll both be on the committee. But the idea of knowing who's doing what is critical. And I think, Tiffany, that's going to have to be worked out between assuming the council goes with this. That's going to have to be worked out between the council, Niles, and the committee. And then it's going to have to be set in asphalt. I won't say stone, and because things change. But the idea of there's going to have to be liaison, and people are going to have to undertake that responsibility. And by the way, they're going to have to be trained a little bit in how to do that job. All right, and we're going to be looking to the council informally for some of the guidance on how that's done and how it should be done so that it reflects well on the council and the town and is effective. So we're going to have to. The committee would have to grow into its job, but it would have to do that in a thoughtful, mature way.
So thanks, folks. This has been a really fabulous discussion, and it sounds like we'll keep momentum, and whether it's on the agenda for the next council meeting, but hopefully we can make a decision soon, because we know that with what's going on with COVID and other things. But I just want to first of all take a time check. I wasn't sure if we had a hard stop. I was okay to keep going maybe until the hour, but appreciate that folks may need to drop off. I did want to just do a couple things. First, there was that other piece around the all mail-in election. I just want to mention, I think in the next meeting that we'll have, the council meeting, we'll have a discussion on the election policy. So undoubtedly that will come up. I think the only thing I wanted to mention is, and I asked if she could, I asked her if she would let me disclose this, and she said yes, it was fine. So I know very well, I've known for 10 years, worked with her, the COVID coordinator currently, Ambassador Deborah Birx, and I spoke to her actually recently, just yesterday. And, she gave a pretty bleak picture of what's going on and for the time period that this is going to continue. While we have a ray of hope in terms of the vaccines, we really have to be vigilant and careful with our families and communities. So again, I think it's a discussion that we'll have next week of just making a determination in a way that will be, I think, what's best for our community to keep us safe and healthy. And that was really all I had on that. And I did want to recognize Mark Efron and Todd Mann and all their incredible work with the committee and the community on the ethics ordinance. And I know you put something in a packet that came out. And I just wanted to see if there was anything that you all wanted to perhaps chat about, knowing how well prepared you've been and you've been here. So let me turn it over to you, and then obviously, hopefully we'll have time if there are other issues that residents wanted to raise. Thanks.
Todd, why don't you go? I don't have anything really to add. I know you put together a package, or put together a note that got distributed in the last day or so. But I think I don't have anything to raise. I'm here in case questions come up. Todd, you're on mute. I can hear you up the street, but I don't think anybody else can.
Thank you. You know, it's not. Yeah, this is my first Zoom call, so I don't know how to act. Sorry. I hope you can hear me with my voice. No, I put that together. You know, my number one, overriding concern is to really honor the commitment to try and communicate more, and more and often as we go through stages. So that's really what was in the packet, which was basically saying we're at the stage where the committee has reported out, the ethics committee, great work with not just with Mark but with Lori and Debbie as well, reported out their findings. We've asked the village our attorney, I'll use attorney rather than counsel so we don't confuse things, to come up with the results of his research, as well as to come up with a proposed language of for an ordinance should be. So I feel like two things. One is we've tried very hard to communicate. I think the ethics committee's done a terrific job of listening at each meeting, incorporating comments, and moving that forward. And we're at a stage for next week where we'll see the resolution. There will be the discussion. At that point, the council will make a decision whether to introduce. We'll vote whether to introduce the ordinance along with any modifications, and then there'll be another period for comment where we wait 30 days. So that's really all I wanted to say at this point, and give all of you. This is your call. This meeting. So I'm happy to entertain any questions from all of you.
I'd like to chime in if I could on a couple of points, and I want to first commend Todd for again the effort to explain what's going on and the background and especially on the ethics ordinance, which of course almost every resident has opposed it. I think it's really important to listen to that. And one of the really productive things that's come out of that community discussion, and I think that the council and the committee were responsive to it, is looking at alternatives. And I'm really happy that we're going to have a discussion, I assume, at the next council meeting on what the alternatives are. A better administrative complaint procedure. I mean, our village attorney laid out 4 or 5 different options. And I really want to see that discussion happen before the ordinance moves forward. And so thank you for giving, as council, giving the assignment to the attorney to really present those. And I'm hoping that on the agenda for next week's council meeting, there really will be a full-bodied discussion of that and maybe some further community input on the alternatives. Because a lot of residents have said, let's look at the alternatives before we move forward with that ordinance. So thank you for doing that. And I want to go back to you, Arthur, and say thank you for writing the explanation there on the tree ordinance. That was really helpful. So people don't feel like things are just sort of coming out of the blue at them, but really taking the time it shows respect, I think, for the fact that we have an engaged community, people who care and pay attention. I mean, most people are too busy because life is difficult, but for those of us who do pay attention, it really does feel respectful to do that, and I appreciate it. So thank you for doing that on the tree ordinance. Todd, thank you for your efforts on the ethics ordinance, and I really hope we have that discussion about the alternatives on the ethics ordinance. I want to go back and pick up one more thing, Jeff, picking up on your point about voting by mail.
What is it? Can I just correct the record on one thing? I'm sorry. Marty said that, I don't know what word she said, virtually every village resident has opposed it. We have not gone around to gather up.
Those who spoke up, yeah.
But
I appreciate
so
it.
we have heard from people who are in favor of it. So I just want to correct the record that we do not have, unanimity in the village on this issue. That's all I wanted to say.
That's an important point, and it
Well, I
goes
think
to,
it's a very important point.
I
Let's
agree.
move on to the voting. Thank you.
I agree. That point goes to the sort of use would be if we could have a kind of public message board where all the comments on various ordinances could be posted so people could see that, have a sense of that, because you know that, but I don't think the community knows that. I appreciate you saying it tonight because that's an important piece of information. I completely, and it'd be great to have a message board where we could see what various people said and the various ideas people have about any ordinance.
Marty, before you get to the mail-in voting, can I just comment on what you all were just talking about? I think there has been a lot of comment about alternatives to ordinance with relationship to the regarding the ethics ordinance, and including what Ron Bolt talked about other communities were doing. And I will tell you that from my observation, it does feel that the discussion about the ordinance, which has been a healthy discussion and a lot of hard work on everyone's part, on the council's end and Mark and Debbie and Lori's end, and I appreciate that. But I think we've been told that we'll decide the alternatives or we'll look into them after. And that's my impression from the previous conversations. I could be wrong, but I think that's backwards, and I think Debbie pointed that out before. And I really think it will not be fair to the community alternatives to the ordinance. So I want to make really sure we have a commitment from the county that we will have a discussion and an investigation into alternatives before the ordinance is proposed. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, this is Jeff, and discussion. I just want to put out there again, respectfully. I believe they're. I don't know if it's the next council meeting or whenever, but again, I don't want to put anyone on the spot. But the question is, when does that discussion happen? And I say that because when I see the research that came out, again, this is Todd was a champion of this, and respectfully I'm very grateful for it. And again, all the work that Mark did. I mean, frankly, from my perspective, when I see this, I almost see an opportunity for a hybrid, right? Like there are things like public trust and other pieces that were researched that almost see a hybrid that would get to a product that could combine some of these things. So the question is, when will that discussion happen? When it comes up the next time in a council meeting? I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but perhaps there'll be time for that at some point.
Yeah, and I would like to make a plug that hybrid would include a good, there are any number of organizations, government and nonprofit organizations that have very good volunteer manuals that, that outline all of the concerns that have been brought up and have ways of dealing with complaints and other issues. So Naomi and I have said this before, but we would be happy to build off of a template and help the village come up with a good, solid volunteer manual.
Let me just jump in and say thank you, Paul and Marty. You sent me a whole bunch of stuff, references that I am just kind of wallowing through at the moment, and have anything else to say about it. But thank you for the information.
So I would hope that the council will have a fulsome discussion on ways of implement what the ethics committee did. And I encourage the council to do that. I think that's as I understood it. So, speaking not for the committee, but for myself, I think a volunteer manual has merit. My concern, in some regard, my concern is that there has to be an initial decision as to whether or not you want an ethics provision that is enforceable by law. Is it enforceable or not? The problem with the volunteer manual alone, with nothing else, is it doesn't have the effect of law. You may get people to sign up if they've volunteered, and just sign up for the volunteer manual. But there are a lot of people in the community, volunteer manual, who won't be bound by the volunteer manual. So I think they're really difficult decisions to make. And in addition, you want a provision that has the effect of law. And I fear that a volunteer manual will. I think it's a good thing to discuss. I have no concerns about a manual. I just think that there has to be this about whether you want to have a provision that has a legal effect. And that's something for the council to decide going forward. And I think you've got a lot of council members here who will undoubtedly be discussing it at the next meeting.
Mark, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with nonprofits and created ethics policies and procedures and manuals and stuff like that. I think that, I'm not sure any of them would work for a political body, but I think there's 2 points to the manual. One is that it lays out expectations so people can't say, I didn't know. Okay? The second thing is that, and what I've had my clients do, is have volunteers sign off on the manual. So they can't say, I didn't agree to it. Why? I think that's enough, because we're not sending these people to prison. We're not suing them for financial harm. We're throwing them out. All right? And so it seems to me would take care of that half of the problem. You're right. You do have to have an enforcement, but the manual would supplement and support it. Thanks.
So I agree with you, Mark. I also did a lot of ethics work for private organizations.
Right.
But my research tells me that governmental bodies are different than private organizations. And my concern is, yes, you could have individual volunteers sign off on a manual and probably make that binding on them. But there are a lot of provisions, but part of the provisions have to do with complaints. So let's assume that I am not on the ethics committee in the future, which probably would be a good thing for me. And I haven't signed off on the ethics manual. I'm not aware of anything to do with the ethics manual, and I have a complaint to make. I wouldn't even know to look at the volunteers manual necessarily. But secondly, more importantly, there are a lot of provisions in the draft right now to do with the process that would be followed, provisions having to do with confidentiality, including by the person who's making it. So my concern is, I don't want to come up with a solution here. The concern is that a manual just addresses the people who are volunteers, doesn't address people who are not volunteer binding on them. So that's a concern I have with manuals. But I think this is all good stuff for the council to hear as they decide what path they want to go going forward.
Yeah, and I will say to Jeff's original question, this needs to be a part of the discussion at the council meeting, and that's what we're here for. So this discussion will be a prequel to any further action. So this is all helpful input, and I appreciate that. All of that. Thank you.
And I just want to say, and I want to also mention, I know Naomi had your hand up, I'm going to get you next, but I just want to say that I say it with kind of a half smile, but I think there's been a lot of things that have come out, and for council members and the other one, and I really feel there's a lot of these pieces now that are on the table between all the hard work of the committee, but also the addition our attorney did, but also the community, where the pieces are there. And I feel that we're pretty close to being able to cross the finish line with a hybrid or something. That's how I feel. I feel very optimistic, especially with the public trust and perhaps the idea that the council could refer things that they feel that they are not in a position to handle. But there's all sorts of good stuff there that I think we could have a good discussion. I bet we could get to go with a lot of folks getting on board.
So I'm just going to, since I've been shepherding, I'll reserve the right to go last. Is just to say there are really just two things that matter to me. One is I'm just a big believer in the oath of office. and that all of us who are in roles like this, that it's important that we perform and act with the best interests of our village and the responsibilities we've taken on. That's number one. And number two, that when things pop up that may not be there, that we have a way of addressing it and a way of enforcing it. And that's what matters most to me. So, I'm happy for this discussion. So thank you.
Naomi, you wanted to say something?
Yes, just so set everybody straight, my name is Naomi. It's always a little mixed up, but never mind. So I want to encourage us to open up this discussion about the ordinance, the ethics ordinance, to the rest of the community. It has a lot of consequence, and I would like to suggest that we have a special listening a session to this, but focused on that, and or also open people to
It's a great idea.
include in the election part of a choice that people can make wide. There are only 20, 30 of us on this call. I'm not sure how many others have been tuning into this, but I think we need to make it much more permeate the rest of the village, so that we can engage more people, understanding what the options are, especially after learning that just about all of the communities around us, some of them are government agencies, do not have this kind of ordinance in place, but rather do deal with it administratively. So what raises a question to me is, why and how can they handle their issues without putting the hand of law onto it? My suggestion.
Again, I hate to always be the rebuttal here, but I think that's great. Have a hearing. I think it's a good idea. Other communities, and I have made some phone calls, have not had the issues that Martin's Addition has had on people about personal bias entering into decisions. So there is one community, Somerset, decision about neutrality, not using the word bias, but neutrality in elections. This has been a problem that Martin's Additions, that other communities apparently have not, according to Ron Bolt. So that's why it's been raised to ethics committee. It's been a problem in the past, and apparently there have been 3 situations in 5 years that could not be addressed because there was no process to have them addressed. That's why Martin's Addition has started this process.
It's really hard for me to understand how these problems have arisen without more information, more evidence, more clarity about what those issues really were beyond rumors. So I just want to be sure that we're not just building our infrastructure on sand, because elections committee for a couple of years, involved in election committee activities. I've never heard these or these inferences, but I just want to make sure that we're not just building something that we really do not need to be as stringent as it is.
Well, Naomi, you're going to have to take word for it that there were 2 complaints registered this past spring. Okay, so I need to introduce this. And we go back 5 years, there was a major issue that was dealt with by the council that had no ability to be resolved because there was no process then. We solved the issues that were raised this past time. Obviously, for confidentiality reasons, I can't say more, but you're just going to have to trust that we didn't go through all this just to go through it. Okay? Really.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
Thank you.
Speaking about elections for a moment, if I could, having chaired the election committee, I have great confidence in the integrity of the Elections Committee, and I say that without reservation. But I do want to talk about the mail vote election, if we can do that before we wrap up here, because we're coming up on 9 o'clock. So I'm going to kind of shift gears here a little bit. Number one, I do think we need to have a discussion about really important, and I'm really glad to see the council agreeing to do that. And I think Naomi's idea of a discussion just on that is really a useful way to go, kind of hybrid maybe that Jeff is thinking of. There are lots of possibilities that I think could be very workable and very smart. But I want to go back to the mail vote question, because I was the chair the other years, and of course I worked closely with Frank Carell for many, many years before that. And Frank and I both agreed before we lost him, I missed him so much, but that we really do need to go to mail vote, certainly this year in 2021. And the public health reasons that Jeff mentioned are obviously paramount. But also it's a matter of civil rights, because we had the highest turnout in years with the mail vote election. It's easier for people with disabilities to vote. It's easier for families with small kids to vote. Mail voting just makes a whole lot of sense in terms of civil rights and accessibility, as well as in terms of, community safety. Sitting at those voting tables all those years and meeting all our neighbors was great fun, but I don't think it's safe, and I don't think that it is as inclusive as mail voting in terms of civil rights and voting access, which really mattered to me and mattered to Frank Carell too. He cared about good, fair, open elections as much as I do. And the other issue here is simply efficiency. I'm an economist, and I like things that are efficient. And I can tell you that doing the vote by mail this past year, difficult as it was to do that for the first time with less than 2 months, from mid-March when the COVID hit to May when the election happened, we put together, I think, with all honesty, a very workable and very fair and open and honest, efficient mail voting system. And, all that's been documented because the election committee documents everything we did. And there are procedures for everything. The mail voting is probably, by my estimate as an economist, 7% less work for the village, and that includes the staff. Niles, this was the election committee, 70% less labor intensive than the voting person. A lot of people, I think, miss the celebration on the sidewalk that we would do as a way of increasing voter participation, to increase voter turnout. I always loved the celebration of the sidewalk. I thought, and I continue to think it's a great event. I think we just do it differently in the future. When hopefully this COVID pandemic is behind us, may it be soon, I think we can reinstitute the celebration on the sidewalk, and among other things, hold it like 2 weeks before the election day, have the candidates come with their literature and use it as a meet and greet opportunity. We don't need to do the election in person again. I think doing it by mail makes sense in terms of efficiency. It really makes sense in terms of accessibility and civil rights, and it doubly, triply makes sense in terms of community safety for this kind of election. So I would to absolutely go by mail vote and to make that decision sooner, in February, maybe even a January meeting. Based on experience, mail voting is the way to go, and I think people liked it. I mean, the feedback that we got from the community was so positive that people really appreciated voting and that it worked well, even though we put it together under these difficult circuits in the mail. And I just want to really emphasize that based on my experience, mail voting, I think, is the way to go for all the reasons I mentioned.
Marty, I'm confused. I thought that's what we're looking at doing. I thought that
But the way, yeah, I mean, that's what I would do.
But isn't that what's in the proposal that's come from the election committee? I thought, basically says, for all intents and purposes, we've got COVID issues, so we're going to continue with mail-in voting. And I think there was just a timeline just to make sure. I guess I just don't understand. I mean, are you seeing something that's not in there? I don't understand.
Yeah,
I'm confused.
The preference in the paperwork that came to the election committee seemed to be, and again, people are just looking at it because the community just saw it as to the December meeting. So I think people are just looking at it. But it said that there was a preference, or it implied there was a preference for voting in person. And I think that that's not the preference. I think that the preference going forward should be voting by mail for the 3 reasons I listed: health reasons, public safety issues, but also just civil rights, voting access, and efficiency. So I really would like to see the council make a decision that, yes, we're doing mail voting this May, but also sort of, just not leave it open like iffy, you know, like depending on what the governor does in April, whether or not we'll vote in person in May. I don't think that's workable. I think you need to make the decision, preferably at the January meeting, to go ahead with the mail vote, at least for this year. And I would urge it in the future.
Well, I think we're headed towards making it for this year. So
That's good. I'm glad to know it.
Todd, I was on the council in 2010, and for that year and the following 2 years, I had people coming up to me complaining. This was when we had the street voting, about the fact that the officials of the government, village government, and council members were walking up to them when they were receiving their clipboards to vote, asking them to do voting for certain people for various reasons. One example was, before you make your vote, we've got too many people presently on the council that are on the north side of the village, and we'd like to get some participating in the south side. Here are the people who are on the south side that you might consider voting for, etc. And when I checked the sunshine laws, or the election laws, it turns out the village is exempt from anything that can be federally or state enforced about that. So I think that Marty's idea of this would eliminate that alone. And it is a very strong reason to consider this as an effective long-term approach to the votes.
I agree, Larry. And one of the things we did in the last 5 years in the election committee, we set up an electioneering zone where you couldn't approach the voting table if you were electioneering for any candidate, because we recognized that had been a problem in the past. So we had this zone of no electioneering when we did it in person. But if you do it by mail, that's completely eliminated. It's not even an issue. And I think that's a really strong reason, again, to just go to mail voting. Our colleagues over in the town of Cherry Chase and village of Cherry Chase, people are doing mail voting as sort of the norm. And I think this is just the fourth good reason to go to mail voting from now on. And again, we can still do a celebration on the sidewalk. We just do it a little differently and do mail voting. And that will become the standard practice here for all these reasons.
Great. So thanks for that, and Todd, it's great to hear, and perhaps we'll have that discussion and maybe decision as early as this council meeting. But I think we all agree that for this year at least, it's probably the strongest consideration for doing this. But I do want to look and be mindful of the time. It feels, frankly, and maybe it's only because I had a cup of coffee, which I'm going to regret, that we could go for hours. But I do want to just gently say, is there anyone, who has something burning they want to say? And before I do that, I just want to, call out, I see Peter Kahn, I see Lori Mitchell, and, Lori, you sit on several committees and task force, but the walkability, I do want to just say, Mark had mentioned, that was just a fantastic discussion, and really thank you. I think we're all better for it. And again, in terms of safety, I just left that discussion feeling really good, with the exception of we're going to have to somehow get Turner on there, but that's the whole issue. But anyway, I just wanted to call that out. I didn't want to necessarily say that you had to say something, but as we approach this hour, I just want to say, is there anyone who has something?
A quick note, you will notice the panels is Village of Martin's Edition, that's Niles. He sits at every one of these meetings monitoring it, making sure it runs. So he's not only in the office during the day, but is often up for these various evening meetings. For every committee meeting that it takes place, he's there monitoring. So thank you, Niles.
So the bad news now is not only will we add a safety committee, we're thinking about adding 6 or 7 more.
I just want to thank Jeff and Mark for their kind comments. I appreciate that, and we will look at Turner as well, Jeff.
No, then I might get written up on an ethics violation for suggesting that. So we just got to be careful. So
this is Mark. If you all do support call it safety less traffic, so walkability has pretty much occupied that space, and done a better job.
So I know we've hit the time. I do want to mention an important comment, and then I guess we'll. I see Elizabeth Goldberg put something on around the listservs, and I do want to mention. I think we'll have a little time at the next council meeting, but we had a really great chat with the committee before the new year, and I know that Niles was there, and we talked about there are some platforms that I think are low risk possibilities. So. Again, I want to just say, I know our council, we do have members of the council, and I don't want to say it's controversial, but I just want to say it's something that we want to look into and be thoughtful about. But I think we all recognize that between the listserv and some platform, there may be some options to us that I think can improve this area. And, you know, I just feel that there will be movement on it. We just have to research it a bit, and maybe we have a timeline. But I'm feeling pretty good about it. And Niles, maybe at the next council meeting, you know, you can even talk about it. You brought up some suggestions, which I thought were fabulous, that seemed like no-brainers, but I don't want to put you on the spot.
Actually, I just did some of my own research on this and had Chase and their listserv, which they state on the official town website that there is not a function of the town of Chase administration. It's completely independent. Given that, they do give it a space, and I've talked to the managers of that to see what they do, how they do it, and why. So there's things to be done there.
And I also would like to chime in and say that I attended the county meeting about the library issue for our Chevy Chase Library. That they have a public message board that is part of their county agency communications mechanism. Open to the public and comments, and everybody can just send a comment in. It's not restricted by private ownership in any way or private management. And I thought that was really a nice option too, a message board. They call it a community message board. And I talked to Niles about it, and that's certainly something that's technologically possible to do. So I really appreciate, you know, Arthur and Jeff looking into this and Niles looking into it. Would be open to everybody. And it'd be something that where everybody could see comments from, you know, it could really have a really helpful impact in terms of community on any future ordinances or any issues on committee meeting, you know, so that, you know, it could just be really a terrific way for really a full community discussion. And that's up on Naomi's idea too about, you know, not everybody has the luxury of being able to attend an evening meeting. People got kids or they, you know, got issues that they can't, you know, stay up late or whatever. And so that kind of community forum in terms of a message board or some platform really is important. And I think it would be such an asset to the village and such a useful thing for people to raise all kinds of issues and suggestions. I've been impressed by how many positive ideas people have about dealing with all of these issues, the safety issues, the COVID issues. People have really good ideas. I love the snow shoveling brigade idea, for example, and that's the kind of thing that having a public message board would really help organize. All the committees could use it. The council would benefit from seeing, you know, comments, pro and con, anything, and from good suggestions. People have good ideas. One of the kids' artworks that I really loved, people have good ideas. We should listen to each other. And I thought that was great. And I want to close on a very positive note, which is that one of the suggestions that came in about dealing with kids' art contest, where all the kids in the neighborhood, ages 4 to 12, say, artworks that say be kind or be thoughtful or, you know, we took care of each other, we look out, whatever, you know, the theme would be. And the shops put those up in the shop windows. I'm sure the store owner would love to help with that. It's a nice way to bring them into this community engagement issues of how we as a community really take care of each other. So I want to put in a plug for one great idea, President, which is about kids' artwork, about how we take care of each other and we look out for each other. Wouldn't that be fun to do?
Well, that is wonderful. And on that little symbol of the VMA love, and everyone, wish you a really safe evening and Godspeed until our next meeting. Thanks,
Bye,
Niles. Amazing.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks again, Niles.
You're
Thank
welcome.
You, Jeff. Thank you, Arthur. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Todd.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Niles.
Yes.
Nice work. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you very much.
I think this was incredibly productive.
Yeah, I think this went well, so I'm glad. Let me go ahead. I'm just going to go ahead and end the meeting for all, so you don't have to do anything on your end, okay?
Okay, good night. Sleep tight. Give Louise a hug.
Will do. She's already asleep.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. And Oh, wait. Okay. Now I'm going to end the meeting for everyone. So just so you know, Tiffany.